I would then like to go to the group discussions that we will continue for the rest of the morning until lunch, basically. Sandra, you will lead us in the first group discussion.
Yes, so we have 3 group discussions today. We'll be starting from what is your ideal situation in terms of multisectoral collaboration, going to how do we reach that ideal situation, and lastly, how do we implement everything that you've heard today into your preparedness and response plans. So that's the first one is about the ideal dimensions of multisectoral collaboration during public health emergencies. So the question that you have to keep in mind is what does multisectoral collaboration mean in the context of all hazard preparedness and response in your country? How would you like to see it happen? So we have a couple of activities in the group today to kind of help us think about it. First of all, you will be making a mind map with your group. I hope most of you have made a mind map before. Well, you can just come up with any question, or any words, concepts, ideas, or even questions related to multisectoral collaboration. Anything you can think of to kind of activate your thinking about it. There are no right or wrong answers. You can say absolutely anything that you relate to this topic. So for example, this is a short example of how you can make a mind map. I just put a couple of words that came up in my mind. And then, of course, you can keep making branches as you move forward from every single word. So that will be the first 15 minutes. Then we have a couple of minutes to think about multisectoral collaboration in the ideal situation, where you will focus on the level of multisectoral collaboration. So at which level must it be predetermined, and how many sectors need to be involved in your preparedness and response plans. The idea is not that you name a specific number, so 3 or 15, but it's that you think about the scope of the amount of sectors. So are we talking about a handful of sectors need to be predetermined, or are we talking about 50, 100 sectors that need to be determined? So that you also know and to which extent do you need to be specific when making your preparedness and response plans. And then you will discuss you really discuss what does multisectoral collaboration look like in the ideal situation with reference to preparedness and with reference to response. If you in your group decide there is no difference between preparedness and response, that is fine. Then of course you can discuss it in one go. But I do expect that there are some small differences with regards to which sectors need to be involved in preparedness and response. And there are a couple of questions that your facilitators will guide you through to help you think about the ideal situation. So that is the activity for the next hour or so. At every table, there are facilitators that will help you through the activity. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. All right, everyone. So if we can settle down again. Then we're going to move on to the second group discussion, which will take place until lunch. It'll be a little bit shorter than anticipated, but I think that is fine because we had a lot of preparation during our first group discussion. So we've discussed a little bit about what the ideal situation in terms of multisectoral collaboration will look like. And now we'd like to discuss how to reach that ideal situation. So we'd like you to identify things that you know are not ideal yet in your country, and then try to think about why that is the case, and then lastly, think about how you can improve that in your country. Before we go there, we'd like for you to think about who is responsible for ensuring that multisectoral collaboration is predetermined in your preparedness and response plans. And also think about who is responsible for ensuring that it actually takes place in the event of a crisis, so that you keep that in mind when thinking about how to improve multisectoral collaboration in your country. So then, for example, you will make a table, and I have an example here for you. For example, a discrepancy between the ideal situation and the reality that you could have is that there's a lack of contact between specific sectors before the public health emergency. And so, for example, you could say what could be a reason for that is that it's unclear which sectors should be contacted prior to the public health emergency. So, for example, during preparedness, and then you can suggest possible improvements, For example, that specific sectors with their task and contact details should be included in preparedness and response plans. And those sectors should be contacted when the preparedness and response plans are being updated to make sure that these contact details are still correct, to make sure that these sectors are aware that they're part of the preparedness and response plans. So this is just a simple example of how you could think about how to improve it in your country. So in your groups, you have a sheet of paper with a table, but you can also make the table bigger if you like. You can also do it digitally. Think about specific aspects of multisectoral collaboration which aren't ideal yet in your country. Think about why this is the case so that you can think about improvements. At the end, with your group, so the last, let's say, 10 minutes, in your groups, try to identify 3 discrepancies that you'd like to share with the rest of us here so that we can learn from each other and not just within our groups. Are there any questions? All right, have fun.
In this collaboration, it depends on what kinds of scenario that made our national.
So in terms of defined goals or goals?
Alrighty. Mike is ready to present from group number 1. It was this table. Okay. The floor is yours, as they say.
Thank you all very much. We had a very, very interesting and intense discussion in group 1. We have quite a few points, but there are 3 I would like to stress here in front. The main point we encountered was that multisectoral collaboration should be from a governmental level organized with all sectors, but the sectors should take their own responsibility for implementing the measures. With that, of course, they need a quality system as well. Usually a quality system is in place, but this quality system should be trained then to also look at the measures that are taken in this crisis. Problem is that it is quite difficult to implement, and one of the reasons is that it is lacking in plans, this structure, and that the responsibilities are unclear. So those are things that need to be resolved to make this possible. And another thing which is really important here is the data management system, that we always know who to include here. And especially with politicians, they change every once in a while. So we also need people here who are more steady there. Well, that also leads me to the next point, and that is the timely exchange of information, especially between the different levels. So we need information from the operational level going up and to the governmental level, and also the information going down in a timely manner to avoid that people have read on the social media the new measures already, while the GPs don't know them yet, and there are discussions at that level and misinterpretations of the information. So we need to avoid that with a good communication channel, and also good trainings and good honest discussions of every role and every responsibility. And we had another point we agreed on, and that is that with a lot of exercises, not all people, not the real people who are having the responsibility in real life are joining the exercise, but they send somebody who's more new or has more time, and that doesn't really work to in a crisis situation to know what everyone's responsibility is. The reason why it happens this way is because those people bearing these responsibilities are often also very, very busy and don't have much time for those kind of things. And the other thing is, in the exercises, not all the needs of the specific country or the specific participants are addressed. So it is very important not to have one very big exercise with all points which need to be addressed, but just to focus on the points who are really important to the participants, and to make sure that they feel that it is important for them as well to join. and to make sure their own benefit of this. I will ask my group if there are any things they would like to add here before we go to questions. Okay, are there any questions about this?
Maybe to reflect, maybe this is maybe connecting to ideas at your tables.
That
With the same problem, or okay.
That's interesting. I really enjoy to hear your approach then, Betty.
Any other questions or remarks? Okay, no, thank you very much, Maaike. Then well, Betty, I don't know what the number of the table is, but then you're next to keep the line of discussion. Then that would be most interesting to hear.
Okay, well, as I said, we had a completely different approach in this, and I think that one of the things, maybe if I say for my group, we find it quite difficult because we thought we have to go into specific examples. So we try to get in specific day-to-day life examples which link to the ideal situation of multisectoral collaboration to what was achieved and what should be done. So that took quite some time, but we came up in the end with 3, 4 that I can present. There was one thing that was very, very important in our group, and we thought, and that was the common goals to achieve, to have in the ideal situation in multisectoral collaboration, you have common goals. But what we noticed, and there were some different examples given, that there's often different priorities given to common goals at different levels. And there's different jobs and responsibilities. And you have to and people make their trade-offs, or sectors make their trade-offs towards those common goals. And actually to achieve a mutual understanding of those common goals, so you need to an overarching common goal, you need to have a clear leadership to achieve that. And you have to allow that there are different goals at different levels that fulfill in the end that common goal. So to achieve that, it is important that the different needs at the different levels are clearly identified, and that trade-offs are made at the different levels to achieve those common goals. But those goals should also be aligned to those different levels, and there should be a clear definition of proportionality of what you're asking for. So it's, for example, there was the example of I think this was the example of the hairdressers. In Italy, for example, that people, there were all kind of protocols which were very strict and they couldn't be fulfilled. But they were given at a certain level, and then if people wanted to go to the hairdresser, they had to measure their temperature, which they did, but they didn't. But that doesn't mean that if they had a higher temperature, that they didn't go to the hairdresser. So you have to be, there has to be proper, it has to be clear, and there has to be proportionality, of course. So the second one we have was instructions and measures that are implemented compared versus the rationality for those that have to follow them. And that was that different measures may turn out different for different sectors. And it also has to do with measure may have a different implication for a different sector. So it may be harsher for the one than for the other. And if there's a lack of communication between those for making the measures and those that have to be implemented, this is going to be difficult. So the solution for us would be that there's someone needs to be responsible for checking the coherence of measures. So if the measures that are implemented, if they're coherent and can thus be, and are also proportional for those that have to be followed. and making sure that the goal of each measure should be clear for everyone. And the example there was, for example, that at different levels, a specific measure may be discussed and there may be protocols, but they do not necessarily communicate clearly between each other. And so that the people that have to implement it are not even aware that those measures were taken at that certain point, or learn about it at a much later stage. I think that bit aligns with the point that you made with that people shouldn't hear it from the media, but this is not a media thing. The last one, and that was the one actually I liked most, but that's not important. That was about cross-country collaboration and leadership and commitment. And you know, that was one of the things that we felt was very important in multisectoral collaboration. And there were two very nice examples. One where it worked very well, and where it didn't work at all, or not at all, but not optimal. And that was the PLF tool. I didn't know what the PLF tool was, but I learned it. And then looking at Corinne, and she knows everything about the PLF tool, I think. The PLF tool has to do with, is a tool that is meant to be able to follow up passengers when they arrive in a country, so that you can do your follow-up research on possible outbreaks. So, and you can follow up the individuals. And it was an outcome of another joint action, Healthy Gateways. And it was implemented through the European Union. But then it's blocked by national data protection officers because they say they're not going to implement it. And they don't accept the PLF. So that was an important thing. And when you're focused with that, then, well, what should be needed to be able to implement it? One of the things is to allow that there are different channels for exchanging these data, so that allow the different countries to use different systems, to assure that there is sufficient resources, because it has to be. Oh, that was the other one, but that has to be paid. But that, and to here was also the sustained financing to make sure that this is going to happen. But important was to allow the opportunity to choose for different countries to achieve the common goal, namely that you want to have an overview of an infection risk and how people travel from one country to another. The other example in the same idea was the DCC, which was implemented during COVID to make sure that people have a certificate that they are allowed to travel because they are vaccinated or have had COVID. And that worked very well because it was implemented everywhere. And that was a clear example of a mutual commitment in the EU and actually worldwide to make sure that people could travel and everybody used the DCC. But the problem is the DCC stops in June 23. So how are you going to follow up on that? So that was also, how could you put in place measures that would improve that? Well, that was to how do you sustain the mutual EU commitment? Again, that was make sure that there is resources. So that's for the EU to come up with resources to make sure of that. And for example, not use the DCC for COVID, but to generalize it to all kinds of vaccinations, travelers vaccinations. Yellow fever was named, but you could expand it to everything to make sure that's a handy tool for everyone to follow. So that was, I think, what we discussed. Did I? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Betty. Thank you very much. Very interesting. There's at least some common ground between the groups of things that how the ideal situation would look like, how to reach there. I think there are some complementary solutions for that. Are there any questions for this table? It's interesting how you have also addressed the EU component, I think, with the PLS. A lot to say about it in the DCC, but it indeed would really help if there is more cooperation on EU level about that. Yeah. Righty. Well, then I go to group 2.
So I will take my notes with me. I think we have a little bit of overlap with the previous groups, but I also think we have some additional points. So we talked about all these discrepancies, more generally also, more broader than only collaboration, I think, multisectoral collaboration. And we chose 3 to highlight right now, not really because we think these three have a priority, but more, I think, because we found these interesting. So the first one is the funding or the lack of a financial perspective in especially preparedness plans. I think that we focused on that because so in most preparedness plans you don't really have a financial appendix or something like that to give an overview of finances or what is important during a response during the response phase. The reason for this is that it's hard to invest in something where you don't necessarily see the results right away. Because so that's what we think is the reason. The solution is to to advocate more of prevention and financial benefits, because prevention is also due to more prevention you can also, how do you say it, prevent more costs. Yeah, exactly. It's more of an investment, so maybe put more emphasis on that, and also make preparedness more sexy. That's also important. Okay, so what do we have more? So the second point that we would like to highlight is the trust. So we saw a lot of mistrust in citizens, so lack of trust in the government. And the reasons for this is because we thought that there was a lot of misinformation, the infodemic, but also there were a lot of experts contradicting each other. So people didn't really know who to trust or who to believe. We talked about the solutions for this. Of course, experts have a personal responsibility in this, but then you take away the ego points, so that's a little bit difficult as a solution. And we talked about making communication plans, so how to deal with this mistrust, but I don't know if we already know how to properly deal with mistrust or how to properly increase the trust in institutions, so maybe more research on that. And I also see here unify messages of different groups. But of course you have various institutions, but at least unify messages from one institution. Okay, so the third one is, oh yeah, the lack of reserves. So the lack of resources that we saw during the pandemic. So we talked about personal protective equipment, and we also talked about healthcare personnel, so personnel capacity. And I think most of the discussion about the solution, we talked about creating like a reserve of people, more of a flexible workforce for healthcare personnel. I think that is also something that Stephanie talked about yesterday. That could be a possible solution. So comparable to what the military does during times of war, you can also put into place a procedure for that for healthcare personnel during times of crisis. So I think that's it overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Any questions or remarks or? Yes, please.
Well, the question of trust is an interesting one. We discussed in our table about how that impacts, because there was the experience that we got to hear from Finland experience, from Finnish background. When you're completely distrusting an institution, whether it's political, and then the same institution you could completely trust after a certain part of the response or as they respond to it. But then as trust builds, expectation also builds. And therefore, just building trust and then setting up unrealistic expectations would be difficult. So, for example, in Finnish, because we were hearing that people started to trust the Red Cross. But when there was the biggest flooding, everybody thought, oh, Red Cross will provide all the blankets and this kind of thing. But clearly there was no mandate. So how do you build trust, yet keep the expectations manageable? That's the challenge.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Sorry, I've shared your story.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, it's also an aspect of the cooperation that maybe did not come across over the last 2 days, but it's a very important asset or base for cooperation.
And I think, because that's very important thing, I think that was, and so also, of course, with everything, also kind of expertise increase, the expectations increase, with everything that goes wrong, you guys get more of it. So, and I think that could be actually an additional point, multisectoral collaboration is important because we can share the shared responsibility that a person. We have it about, we talk about shared responsibility, but it's also shared expectation and so on. And I think that's an important thing.
I mean, last evening we heard from Casper's. He was telling the medical experts, and now also being called on the TV to talk about the Ukraine conflict.
Yeah.
Because they're trusted.
Because they're trusted, but it's an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And this comes back in your group? This topic? No? No, because it's a bit in a new dimension. I think it's valuable. Who should, who has a role in that, in this building trust among sectors?
It's a shared responsibility, and people have to be honest enough to recognize the boundaries of their expertise. And then they say, just because I am a trusted source in public health, I can't be the trusted source on all subject matters that I have known. Therefore, even if people are asked to be coming to that space where they're not, they should be honest enough to say that I am not the right person to be here.
Yeah, so that's more of an individual responsibility for you as an expert. And I think for the institutions, they also have a responsibility to be transparent because that is something that builds trust. So I think that's very important in this issue. Yeah. Be honest, be transparent. Yeah. Especially for citizens then. Yeah. And I think between institutions, yeah, we're human. Everyone is human, so maybe build relationships, invest in building relationships. But maybe that has already been done. I don't know. Really have an overview on that, but
Yeah. Oh, I think it makes sense. I mean, the openness in the that's not only from citizens but also between organizations. Yeah, being transparent.
I also think that if you are clear about expectations, not expectations of the sectors that are involved, then you can also, in my mind, maybe I'm wrong, that you know there's an expectation, and you also know what boundaries are. You're clear about what you expect for someone, what we discussed earlier, when somewhere making the difference between the sector and the roles. It's easier than shift because if the expectation exceeds your expertise or your role, and it's easier to say we need some additional expertise here or an additional role here to go through. And that's
Just sorry, Lorraine. Just wanted to add to that. The whole concept of starting early and having an established planning process allows the relationships, the trust to be built. Yeah, and the expectations to be worked through. So these things we can lay them out in the beginning, but they will change as they applied and experienced. So going back to one of the topics that we came up with, and I think others as well, the importance of credible leadership for that process and exhibiting the values of transparency, collaboration, and not blame, because we can't afford to blame culture in this sort of situation. Quality needs to be managed in some way, shape, or form. But when you hit a problem and something goes wrong, as it inevitably will, people aren't afraid to put their hands up, and the rest of the collaborative team then works to solve that particular issue. This sounds like nirvana to me. Whether it's achievable is another matter, but we must try.
Well, I think it's also is in line with the experience I have that doing reviews or looking back together with other partners and be open and share what did we go good and what can be better, also builds trust, because then at least you put together on the table and be at that moment hopefully transparent, and then you have a common ground to continue again. But then hopefully it also leads to improved governance at that time. Okay, it's a nice dimension. Thank you for bringing it up. Table 2. Yeah. We finish with table 4. Lois.
All right, hi everyone. I think I can keep it very short because I think most of the things that our table has mentioned, I saw some people nodding as well during especially the first presentation and the last, that we recognize a lot of the things that have already been said, especially about being honest, about being transparent in communication, and also the personal contacts that I think Sophie mentioned. So I think the most important discrepancies that we noticed that I wrote down is that there is a lack of a mandate and that sometimes the roles can be unclear, the roles and responsibilities for different sectors, that there can be a blurry line, and that is a big discrepancy. A second point that we have is that there can be a lack of contact about everyone's activities, the different activities of the different sectors, and sometimes that it works both ways, communication, and that sometimes people don't inform each other enough. And thirdly, we have that during planning for emergency, especially in an all-hazard approach, that there can be unintended consequences on other parts of society, I think was mentioned. And the reasons for discrepancies that we mentioned are a lack of resources came back a lot in our group. Also, a lack of consideration, again, linking to the unintended consequences for some parts of society. We also mentioned that there is no way to prepare for everything, so that there is always a lack of preparation for the unpredictability of the situation. And so possible improvements, I think, again, it was mentioned already. We mentioned that people need to sit down and it's good to have personal contacts, I think we mentioned, especially like in these types of situations, that in workshops, you communicate with each other so that you know what does the other person have to offer, sit down and determine different each other's roles, goals. I think was also mentioned that there is some interest in a common center. I think you mentioned the example from Iceland, that they have a common center, and then people can adapt this to their own personal countries and personal situations. I mentioned already that the workshops such as these with other countries can be very helpful. And again, being honest and transparent, and also building a space, I think we mentioned in terms of unintended consequences, building a space to think about these unintended consequences, that there is space for that. So I think those were the most important things that were mentioned. I'm looking at my group to see if there's anything that I've missed, or is it a good summary of what we've discussed so far? Yeah? Yeah, especially the only thing that we didn't mention in here is the trust that you mentioned just now. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything about that or if this is good.
I think it's on the issue about building trust. Is one of the ways we always can improve is by doing a lot of training and exercising in the inter-pandemic or inter-emergency period, which often we don't take it as seriously as we should. Like every time there's an incident, you need to learn from it, adapt your plan, test the modified plan, and be prepared. So the training and exercise component is really important.
Okay, I think it has been a good group work, because I think there are many different aspects come along. There was also similarities, but I think a good groundwork for the last session, with which we will end the afternoon, how to bring improved preparedness, intersectoral forward in your own country. So for now, I think time for lunch. We have quite a good break, I see. So it is until 2 o'clock.